Welcome to Reformed Thinking. It is good to have you with us as we open up the archives of church history to see what we can learn today.
It is a pleasure to be here.
The goal here is pretty simple. We take these historical theological texts, some are famous, some are kind of forgotten, and we just walk through them. We want to sharpen our own understanding of Christian doctrine.
And see how the giants of the faith read the Bible. It's amazing how often they were wrestling with the exact same things we are today.
They really were.
Hmm.
And speaking of giants, or heavyweights, we're looking at one today. We're discussing Jonathan Edwards.
Ah, yes.
Edwards. And I feel like we have to address the elephant in the room right away. When most people hear the name Jonathan Edwards, they think of one thing.
Sinners in the hands of an angry God.
Exactly. The spider dangling over the flame. They think of, just fear.
And that's the common caricature, isn't it? And look, that sermon is powerful, it's biblically faithful, but it paints such an incomplete picture if that's all you know about him.
Right.
Edwards was a theologian of joy, a theologian of immense comfort. And today we're looking at a text that really shows that softer but equally rigorous side of him.
So what are we getting into?
We're discussing his exposition of Psalm 65, verse 2. He titled it, "The Most High, a Prayer-Hearing God."
The Most High, a prayer-hearing God. Okay, that already sounds a lot more inviting than the spider illustration.
It is. The text he's expounding is so simple. O thou that hearest prayer. That's it. And the context here, it's likely King David praising God for some kind of public mercy. A massive answer to prayer for the whole nation. Maybe they were delivered from enemies, or a famine ended.
A national level event.
Yes. But Edwards does what he does best. He takes this one specific instance and he zooms way out to look at the very character of God. He wants to establish that hearing prayer isn't just something God does on occasion, it's who he is.
And that really brings us to the central tension of this whole deep dive.
Right.
And it's one that I think every believer struggles with at some point.
I think so.
We know, especially in Reformed theology, that God is sovereign. He is the Most High. He's all-knowing. He decrees the end from the beginning. So, the question is simple. If God is so high above us, and if he already knows what we need, why does he need us to pray?
Right. Why go through the motions?
And maybe more to the point, why would he even listen to worms of the dust, as Edwards calls us?
That is the question. And Edwards, he does not dodge it. His mission in this text is to clarify how prayer actually functions within God's sovereignty. He wants to prove that God is distinct from all the false gods precisely because he hears prayer, and then to explain the mechanism, the how and the why of this whole interaction.
Okay, so let's get into it. He starts by defining his terms, which I appreciate. We sort of take the word hearing for granted. I speak, you hear.
Yeah.
Simple. But Edwards says when the Bible says God hears prayer, it means something much more than just acoustic reception.
Yeah, he's not a cosmic recording device.
Right.
If hearing just meant aware of the sound, well, God hears everything. He hears blasphemy, he hears lies, he hears every idle conversation. But Edwards breaks down hearing prayer into two very specific theological criteria. The first one is acceptance.
Acceptance. Okay, let's unpack that a little. What does he mean?
It means that God approves of the address itself. He is pleased that the person is speaking to him. Edwards says God accepts the honor that's being paid to him in the very act of praying.
So it's relational. It's not just the data transfer of I need bread.
Right.
It's God looking with favor on the person who is asking for the bread.
Precisely. That's the first part. And the second criterion is action.
Action.
Edwards says God acts agreeably to his acceptance. Now, this is where we have to be really careful, because he clarifies that this doesn't always mean God just hands over the specific item you requested right then and there.
So it's not a vending machine.
Not at all. It means he manifests himself in response. And he gives this beautiful example of this from the Old Testament, the story of Hannah in 1 Samuel.
Oh, I love this narrative. You have Hannah. She's barren. She's dealing with a rival wife who's just tormenting her. She's miserable. The text says she was a woman of a sorrowful spirit.
She really was. I mean, she was in what we would probably call a state of depression. And she goes to the tabernacle, and as the text says, she poured out her soul before God.
And Edwards points out something fascinating about the timeline here. Hannah prays. She asks for a son. She finishes praying. And then verse 18 says she did eat, and her countenance was no more sad.
Yes, but the key is she didn't have the baby yet. She wasn't even pregnant yet.
Right. So what happened?
That's the key insight. God heard her prayer in the sense that he gave her a discovery of his mercy during the prayer. Edwards calls it a sweet view of God's grace that quieted her mind.
So the immediate answer wasn't the child. It was peace.
It was peace. It was the ability to rest in God's will. That is action. That is God acting agreeably to her request by sustaining her heart long before he sustained her body with a child.
You know, that completely changes how we view answered prayer. We usually only check the yes box when we get the tangible thing.
Mm.
But Edwards is saying the spiritual stabilization, that's also the answer.
Yes. But he doesn't stop there with just the internal. He also talks about providence. The second way God acts is by outwardly dealing with the world. He starts moving pieces on the board, kings, weather, health, to bring about an answer that actually aligns with the request.
Okay, so from there he goes on to say that God isn't just a prayer-hearing God, but that he is famously or eminently such a God. That's a very Puritan word, isn't it? Eminently.
It is. It means he's the ultimate example of it, supremely conspicuously so. And Edward sets out to prove this eminence by looking at a few things, starting with accessibility.
Accessibility.
And this section is one of the most comforting parts of the whole text. He points out that the throne of grace has no veil.
Right. In the Old Testament temple, that veil was basically a giant do not enter sign. It was a physical barrier between a holy God and sinful man.
And what did Christ do? He rent that veil from top to bottom. Edwards just marvels at this. He uses that phrase, worms of the dust, to highlight how small we are, how corrupted we are. And yet, these worms are permitted to approach the infinite creator. And not with groveling fear, but with boldness.
He also makes the point that this access is universal now. It's not just for the high priest anymore.
Not at all.
It's for all nations.
Oh!
And it's for vile sinners. You don't have to clean yourself up before you go to the throne. You go to the throne to get cleaned up.
That is the whole distinctive of the gospel. And this leads to a point Edwards makes that I find frankly surprising, especially given his reputation for sternness. He talks about importunity.
Importunity. So that's persistence.
Yes.
Almost like annoying persistence, refusing to take no for an answer.
Yes, exactly that. And Edwards argues that God actually likes being bothered in this way.
Really?
Yeah. He points to the blind man in Luke 18. The crowd is yelling at him, "Be quiet, don't bother the master." But what does he do? He screams louder. And Jesus doesn't rebuke him. He stops and heals him.
Or the parable of the unjust judge. The widow gets justice simply because she wouldn't stop knocking on his door.
She just wore him down. And the strongest example he gives has to be Jacob wrestling with God in Genesis 32.
I mean, just think about the audacity of that. He is physically wrestling with the angel of the Lord, and he says, "I will not let thee go, except thou bless me."
And Edwards uses incredibly strong language here. He says God allows himself to be, in a sense, conquered by humble, fervent prayer. Jacob's name was changed to Israel, which means he struggles with God because as a prince, he had power with God and prevailed.
He prevailed against God.
Edwards is showing us that God delights in a faith that is strong enough to wrestle. He doesn't want passive resignation. He wants active, clinging pursuit.
That is a major shift in how we usually think. We often think piety means just quietly saying, well, whatever happens, happens.
Right.
But Edwards seems to be saying, no, grab hold of the promises of God and do not let go.
Within the bounds of submission, yes. It's a wrestling for a blessing, not a wrestling against God's nature. It's a profound difference.
He also talks about the speed and the liberality of God's answers. There's that verse in Isaiah 65, "Before they call, I will answer."
Which speaks to God's readiness. He isn't reluctant. He's not sitting back with his arms crossed, waiting for us to convince him to be nice. He's leaning forward, ready to give. And when he gives, Edwards says, he is a liberal giver.
He contrasts this with how we humans give. And this part really hit home for me. Edwards says when people give, they usually upbraid. They scold.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, fine, I'll help you, but you really should have been more careful with your money, or I'll do this for you, but remember, this is the last time.
Right. There's always a lecture attached to human charity, a little string. But Jitter says God gives without upbraiding. He doesn't rub our nose in our neediness when we come to him.
And not only that, but the answer often exceeds the request. Look at Solomon. All he asked for was wisdom.
Just wisdom to rule his people well.
And God was so pleased with that request that he gave him wisdom, plus riches, plus honor, more than he ever dreamed of asking for.
It's the supersized principle of grace. God is not stingy. And to really drive this point of eminence home, Edwards then goes through what I would call a hall of fame of answered prayers. He just starts listing these massive, world-altering historical events that were triggered by prayer.
It's a stunning list when you see them all together.
It is. You have Jacob praying that God would turn Esau's heart. And remember, Esau was coming with 400 men to kill him.
And after Jacob prays all night, they embrace as brothers. It's a total reversal.
A total reversal. You have Moses praying for the plagues of Egypt to be reversed one by one. You have Samson dying of thirst, and God brings water for him from a jawbone.
And of course, the big one, Joshua.
Yes. Joshua commanding the sun and the moon to stand still. Edwards lingers on this one, and for good reason. It shows God literally suspending the laws of physics, the very mechanics of the solar system, in response to the voice of a man.
That's the ultimate proof, isn't it?
It is. There is no power in nature that is greater than the God who listens to the prayers of his people.
And that leads perfectly into his next section, where he contrasts the true God with all the false gods. Now, why does he spend so much time on this? Is he just, bashing pagan nations?
No, it's not just for rhetorical effect. He's highlighting the absolute uniqueness of a hearing God. In the ancient world, and really in any idolatrous system today, the gods are terrifyingly silent.
So he categorizes them.
He does. First, you have the simple idols, stocks and stones. He kind of mocks them a bit, echoing the Psalms. They have carved ears, but they can't process sound. They're nothing in the world.
Then you have nature worship, the sun, the moon, the stars.
Right. And he admits these things are glorious. The sun is powerful, but it lacks knowledge. It lacks sentience. It acts by what he calls a necessity of nature.
What does he mean by that?
The sun must rise. It doesn't choose to rise because you asked it to. It can't will to help you. It's just an object, albeit a magnificent one.
Okay, then he mentions animals, like the Egyptian bull worship.
Living, yes, but irrational. And then he gets to the darkest category, devils.
This is where his language gets really vivid.
It does. Some cultures, then and now, worship spirits or demons to appease them or get power from them. And Edwards argues that, yes, these are powerful spirits, but they lack omniscience. They can't hear your internal thoughts. And more importantly, they hate the worshiper.
He uses that terrifying analogy of the wolf.
Yes.
Yeah.
He says a devil helping a worshiper is like a hungry wolf protecting a lamb. The wolf might scare off another predator, sure, but only so he can eat the lamb himself later. The only reward for serving a false god is eventual destruction.
So in contrast to all of that, the true God has omniscience.
Right. He can hear millions of prayers from all over the world all at the same time without getting confused.
And he hears the silent petitions. This goes right back to Hannah.
It does. Her lips were moving, but her voice wasn't heard. Eli the priest literally thought she was drunk.
But God heard her heart perfectly.
Perfectly. Meanwhile, the worshippers of Baal, as Elijah pointed out on Mount Carmel, they had to scream and shout and cut themselves just trying to get their God's attention. The true God hears the faintest silent whisper of the heart.
So we've established that God hears and that he hears uniquely. Now we get to the really heavy theological lifting.
Yeah.
Section 4, the theology of prayer, the why.
This is that philosophical problem we touched on at the start. Edwards frames the question himself. If God knows what we need before we ask, which Jesus explicitly says in Matthew 6.8, why make us ask? Is it some kind of game?
Right. If I know my child is hungry, I just feed him. I don't make him fill out a formal request.
Exactly. So Edwards clarifies the Reformed position right away. First, prayer is not for God's information. We are not breaking news to God. Lord, the medical report came back and it's bad. He knows. He knew before the doctor did.
Okay, so we're not informing him.
And secondly, God is not moved or persuaded in his nature. He is immutable, unchangeable. We don't change God's mind from a no to a yes by being particularly charming or eloquent in our prayer.
So, if we aren't informing him and we aren't changing his nature, what on earth are we doing?
That's the million-dollar question. And Edwards gives two main reasons. One is Godward, and the other is manward.
Okay.
The Godward reason is that prayer is a sensible acknowledgement of dependence. It glorifies the fountain of all good. By asking, we are publicly and personally stating, I do not have this. You have this. I need you. It puts the creature and the creator in their proper places.
It's an act of humility. It's us admitting we are not self-sufficient.
Exactly. But the second reason, the manward reason, is maybe even more practical for us. Prayer prepares the recipient.
Prepares us. How so?
Edwards argues that the act of fervent prayer, of wrestling with God, it excites a sense of our own need. It makes us value the mercy when it comes.
That makes sense. If God just dropped blessings on us constantly without us asking, we would just take them for granted. We wouldn't even notice half of them.
We wouldn't. The struggle of prayer, the waiting, the asking, that pouring out of the soul like Hannah did, it digs out a capacity in our hearts to receive the answer with genuine gratitude.
Like with Hannah. If she had just been given a child right away, she would have been happy, of course.
Of course. But after years of weeping and praying for one, when Samuel was finally born, what did she do? She immediately dedicated him back to the Lord. The prayer itself prepared her to steward the blessing correctly.
So Edwards sums all this up by saying, prayer constitutes the order of bestowment.
Yes, that's the phrase. God decides to give through the means of prayer. He ordains the end, which is the blessing, and he ordains the means to that end, which is the prayer. He built the sequence, ask, then receive. Not because our asking forces his hand, but because that is the pipeline he designed for his glory and for our good.
But that still leaves a pretty big question on the table. Why does a holy God listen to us at all? We've already established we're worms of the dust. We are sinners. Why doesn't he just turn a deaf ear to our polluted prayers, as Edwards calls them?
And that question brings us right to the absolute center of Edwards' theology, and all Christian theology, really, the mediator. The only basis for any of this is Jesus Christ.
So Edwards breaks down the work of the mediator into 3 specific actions that make prayer possible. What's the first one?
The first is atonement. Edwards uses this image of a wall of brass. Our guilt, our sin, is like a solid brass wall that completely blocks our access to God. He also calls it a cloud through which prayer cannot pass.
So our prayers just bounce off the ceiling of our own sin.
Right. But the blood of Christ removes that wall. It pays the debt. It rents the veil. Without atonement, prayer is just wishful thinking shouted at a wall.
Okay, so atonement removes the barrier. What's the second action?
The second is obedience, or what theologians call merit.
How is that different from atonement?
It's a subtle but vital distinction. Atonement removes the negative, which is our sin. Obedience provides the positive, which is Christ's perfect righteousness. He didn't just wipe our slate clean. He wrote his own perfect record onto it. He purchased the very privilege of being heard for us.
He purchased that privilege.
Yes, and Edwards makes this massive connection here back to Joshua. He says the only reason Joshua stopping the sun was even possible was because of the future merit of Christ. The only reason God listened to a man command the solar system was because that man stood in the credited righteousness of the coming Messiah.
So all the Old Testament miracles were essentially powered by the future New Testament cross.
In the mind of God, who sees all of time at once.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a staggering thought. And the third action is intercession.
This is what Christ is doing right now.
Right now, at the right hand of the Father. And Edwards uses the imagery from Revelation 8, the angel standing at the altar with the golden censer.
The incense.
Yes. The prayers of the saints are described as needing incense to be added to them to make them smell sweet to God. Edwards says Christ stands there mixing his own merit, his own perfect righteousness, with our flawed prayers to make them acceptable and pleasing to the Father.
I love that image because, let's be honest, our prayers are often so weak, they're distracted, they can be selfish. On their own, they probably don't smell very good.
Edwards calls them polluted things, but when they are mixed with the pure incense of Christ's work, they become a sweet savor. Without the mediator, Edwards is blunt. The throne of grace is nothing but a tribunal of justice.
And you don't want to approach a tribunal of justice if you're guilty.
You don't. You need a mediator to turn it into a throne of grace.
Okay, so we have the definition, the eminence, the theology, and the mediator. But we have to get practical now, because there's someone listening right now who's thinking, this is all great theory, but I prayed, I poured my heart out. I prayed for my marriage, I prayed for my health, I prayed for my child. And the answer was silence, or the answer was no.
This is the section on troubleshooting unanswered prayer. Edwards absolutely anticipates this objection. I prayed, but he didn't answer. And he offers 3 possible diagnoses for why that might be the case.
And the first one is, it's a tough one to hear, idolatry of lusts.
It is tough. He quotes James chapter 4, "You ask and receive not, because ye ask amiss, to consume it upon your lusts." Edwards says if you're asking God for money just to feed your pride or for success just to serve your vanity, God will not answer that prayer.
Why not?
Because he will not arm his enemies. If you intend to use the gift against God's own glory, he actually loves you too much to give it to you. It would destroy you.
Okay. What's the second diagnosis?
The second is insincerity or unbelief. This goes back to the heart. Edwards talks about people who pray with their words but not with their spirit.
What's an example of that?
The one he gives is asking God to be purged from a particular sin while you're still secretly loving that sin and have no real intention of giving it up. Lord, make me pure, but not yet. God sees right through that. He sees the heart.
He also mentions the attitude of the petitioner here, the difference between approaching God as a creditor and approaching him as a beggar.
That is a vital distinction. Some people come to God like creditors. God, look, I went to church, I tithed my 10%, I was a good person this week, so you owe me this answer. Edwards says that is not prayer, that's a demand.
And God doesn't respond to demands.
No. A true prayer comes from the posture of a beggar, someone who knows they deserve nothing and is asking for pure grace. If there's no real reliance on God's sufficiency and mercy, it isn't technically prayer in God's eyes.
And the third diagnosis, this is the one that I think applies to the sincere believer who is really hurting and confused. Divine wisdom.
Yes. And here, Edwards uses the classic father and child analogy. A toddler asks for a sharp knife because it's shiny and interesting. The loving father says no.
And the child throws a tantrum, thinking the father is being mean or just ignoring him.
Right. But the father is actually exercising superior wisdom and love. Edwards says we shouldn't want God's infinite wisdom to be subject to our finite ignorance.
And sometimes the better answer is actually a different thing than what we asked for.
Precisely. You might ask for temporal relief. Lord, please just take this trial away. God might answer with spiritual strength, no, but I will give you the grace to endure it and grow through it. The spiritual good is always the higher gift. And Edwards has this one quote here that is just so powerful and worth memorizing. He says, God never once failed of hearing a sincere and believing prayer.
Never once.
Never once. He means that God always answers. But sometimes the answer is packaged differently than we expect, according to his perfect wisdom.
That brings us to the final group that Edwards addresses. It's the skeptic, or maybe the defeatist, the person who says, look, I get all this, but I'm not a religious person. I'm in a natural condition, as Edwards would put it, unconverted. I don't have saving faith, so I shouldn't pray. It would just be hypocritical.
And Edwards calls this what it is, an excuse, and he rebuts it powerfully. First, he says the command to pray is universal. It applies to everyone. He points to Simon Magus in the book of Acts, a wicked man trying to buy the Holy Spirit who was told by Peter to pray for forgiveness.
So the command stands, regardless of your spiritual state.
It does. And then he appeals to God's sovereignty again. He says God is so sovereign he can hear the wicked if he chooses to.
He's not obligated to, but he can.
Right. God isn't bound by a covenant to hear the non-believer in the same way. He's promised to hear his children, but his sovereign mercy is vast. Edwards lists King Ahab, one of the most terrible kings in Israel's history, who humbled himself, and God postponed the judgment. He mentions the Ninevites in the book of Jonah. They were pagans, but they cried out, and God spared their entire city.
He even uses nature again here, doesn't he? He says God hears the cry of the ravens.
He does. And the logic is simple. If God listens to a hungry bird that has no eternal soul, why would he refuse to listen to a human being made in his own image, crying out for help or happiness?
So for Edwards, prayer can be a means of preparation for salvation.
Exactly. You shouldn't wait until you feel saved enough to start praying. You should pray in order to be saved.
And the warning he leaves at the end of this section is pretty stark. He says, if you have the revelation of a prayer-hearing God, if you've heard this, if you know the true God exists, and you still stay silent, you're worse off than the pagans.
It sounds harsh, but his logic is sound. Because the pagans are at least crying out to something, even if it's just rocks and stones. They're desperate. If you have the living God within earshot and you just refuse to speak to him, that is a level of inexcusable pride.
So where does all this leave us? We've covered a lot of ground here, from the definition of hearing to the work of the mediator.
We have. We've seen that God actually defines himself by his willingness to hear our prayers. We've seen that we have a mediator who has cleared the path for us. And we've seen that prayer is the very mechanism God has chosen to govern the world and dispense his blessings.
It really just demolishes the excuse of, well, God is sovereign, so I don't need to do anything.
It completely flips it on its head. God is sovereign, therefore I should do something. Because he is sovereign, my prayers actually have a destination where real power resides. They aren't just empty words floating in the cosmos.
You know, I think the biggest takeaway for me from this whole text is just the sheer privilege of it all. Edwards closes by reminding us that we don't pray to stocks or stones or to hateful devils. We pray to a God who, as the Bible says, delights in mercy.
That's the phrase to hold on to. He delights in it. He isn't reluctant. He's not annoyed by us. He enjoys showing mercy.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with the provocative thought that comes right out of Edwards' logic here. He suggests that prayer is a sensible acknowledgement of dependence. That's his core definition. So let's just flip that over. If we aren't praying, are we implicitly, even if unconsciously, claiming that we are self-sufficient gods?
That's a haunting question. Prayerlessness becomes a form of practical atheism. It's living as if we're the ones in control. It's saying, I've got this.
And to take it one step further, if God acts through prayer, as Edwards so powerfully argues, if he has established that sequence of ask and receive, what mercies, what help, what grace is currently sitting in the warehouse of heaven withheld simply because we haven't aligned ourselves to receive them by asking?
You have not because you ask not. It's one of the simplest and most convicting verses in the Bible. It really makes you want to stop talking and start praying.
It certainly does. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into Reformed thinking. We hope this exploration of Jonathan Edwards helps you approach the throne of grace with a little more boldness today.
And just remember, the veil is rent. The way is open.
Until next time.